Hey everyone, welcome back to Tech Tango. This is Nikhil SK. Most of y'all know me as SK Please, and some of y'all know that I did play a lot of esports back in the day, and I still continue to play it. And that's why today's topics are super interesting to me because we are going to be talking about Nvidia Reflex, and with respective to Nvidia Reflex, we're going to be talking about high frames and low latency. So traditionally, we've been uh, basically recording our system's performance with FPS. I think this is very common. The higher the FPS, we know it's much smoother. We know how everyone's moved on from 60 hertz to 140 to 240, and now 60 hertz monitors. But that's how we've always measured how good our PC is. We've always looked at the frame rates in various other titles that we all play, and that's traditionally been the way we tell our friends, or even when you're streaming and everyone else, that hey, my system's actually doing well because I have a set 144 hertz, or I have, hey, I'm pushing 240 hertz, or nowadays I'm pushing 360 hertz. But there is another huge topic here, right? Yes, there is high frames, very important, but there's also something called low latency. System latency is also super vital, and it all comes down to those milliseconds, which you might think is very unnoticeable, but it's not. It's really not, because system latency plays a very key role, especially in competitive shooters like Valorant, Rainbow Six. We got Apex Legends, uh, most of the battle royals as well, right? COD Warzone, and I feel like it's kind of overlooked because you're kind of satisfied with the frames on the other hand, but system latency, that is everything from your mouse click all the way to your screen. So there's like this whole process that happens, right? And most of the time in GPU intensive scenarios, right, the CPU basically queues up these frames into a render queue, and then it gets fed to your GPU. So you're constantly getting that high frame rate. But the downside of getting these high frame rates is that you are having a much larger system latency, right? So with the release of NVIDIA Reflex, um, in most of the popular esports titles, I think right now we're almost close to like 30, 35 plus titles that support Reflex. What we are focusing on with NVIDIA Reflex is basically in GPU intensive scenarios. NVIDIA Reflex gives you the setting in game, which then dynamically reduces your system latency. Now, how does it do that? So, we spoke about the CPU queuing up these frames for the GPU, so it's constantly getting fed. So, what NVIDIA Reflex does is basically optimize that render queue. Now, your CPU and GPU are basically working in sync and constantly giving you that high frame, as well as reducing your system latency, right? And there's a lot of titles that support Reflex right now, and some of the key elements, I feel like initially a lot of people are skeptical, or people would think twice using it. But my experience with Reflex, especially in Valorant, especially in games like Rust and stuff, where there's a lot of movement going on and there's a lot of stuff you have to look at, I feel like the responsiveness is so much better. Your aim is much smoother. If people who have used it in Valorant, you will definitely agree with me on this. And the main thing I feel is the up to date location of your opponents. There are several videos where it's proved. We've tested this out with Reflex, and you will see that reducing even from a 40, 45 to 50 milliseconds to like a 20 milliseconds, it makes a huge difference in your games and your fragging potential. And it's a game changer to say the least. Now, with respect to Reflex, there are a various amount of products. 360 hertz monitors are the one right now with not only the reflex setting. Yes, in game they allow you to check your system latency. Most games like Valo, I've seen monitors as well now that support the latency analyzer, so you can actually see the difference with and without the reflex, and it makes everything much smoother. And one thing I'd like to add before me ending this topic is that in India, we know we cannot really, all of us have very weird internets, so we can't really control network latency, but we can control our system latency. I hope everyone here who are playing Reflex supported games do turn NVIDIA Reflex on and enjoy it at its full potential.